I don't see any other cameras out there, just a bunch of circles. Can you guys hear me? Oh, wait, you can't talk. Ah, sorry. Give me a thumbs up, Ben. Can you hear my voice? You're the only face I can see. Can you see me? Ah, right on, dude. Excellent. Excellent. Thank you, guys. Recording.
Nick, what park's in the background of your I can't talk. What park is that?
Waterbury Center or
Uh-huh.
Waterbury Promotes, whatever. But I tried to use Brighton, but for some reason that background was backwards.
So let me ask you this. Do you feel like you're the guy that's in charge of the tow rope for the water skiers?
I feel like I should have a fan and somebody splashing water on me so it looks like I'm really on the boat.
Now I'm tempted to change my background, but I probably won't. Cool.
I could go back to some of the other ones I've used, but I don't know if they'd be good ones. The Simpsons, you know.
Yeah, maybe not today.
Do a lot of other regions not give their people cameras, or is everybody just not putting their camera on? I think we got some camera shy people.
It's okay.
Not Ben though. Ben's rocking his camera.
Yeah, Ben.
He's our new assistant at Smugs.
Oh.
Hi, Christy.
Hey, Christy. Nice to see you. Ben, new assistant at Smugs too. I love seeing people's faces. Christy is she's our new seasonal maintenance tech, which I'm psyched. She's going to be helping out in Region 3. So Christy, I can't wait to meet you in person.
Nice.
And Ben, also, I'm psyched. Smuggler's Notch. I was at the OG, the original Smuggler's Notch 20 years ago. First state park I ever worked in.
Agnes was working there back in '99.
Don't date me so much. Don't date me so much, but it's true.
Before most all y'all were born. Robert, you got a poor connection, but we got a nice picture. Thank you. I see your face now. Oh, thanks, Kate. Throwing on the camera just for me. How's it go? I'll be like, oh. Will you be able to tell when our two presenters show up? Like, I don't.
I'm here.
Yeah, cool.
Is that Shalini?
No, it's Xusana, which
Xusana,
is almost.
hello.
Oh, hey, Xusana.
Hey,
How are you?
doing good. How's everyone else?
We're
Doing
good. We're good.
Everybody's virtual backgrounds. It's so much better than sort of the glass window in an office building.
You got to download some really cool backgrounds. I like to switch it up every meeting.
Yeah, we've gotten pretty good about them. These ones, it's fun. We've got all these different parks ones, and I was just saying to Nick that he looks like he's the guy that's in charge of holding the rope for a water skier. So it's really cracking me up. And my background, there's a couple of interesting situations going on with mine where there's like some guys getting, like buried underneath an inner tube, and that's what happens in parks. Things just can happen in parks. Yeah, some of these are pretty awesome. It would be fun if we had one for every park, but that would be far too many of them. Cool. So people will be, well, Nick, I'll let you do all the talking. I'm going to untalk here. I'm going to hit mute.
Untalk.
Okay. But people will be coming in probably pretty soon.
Yes, I'll give them a few. I'll give a couple extra minutes. Just let's see, 22. We still need a few more, so a couple extra minutes.
I'm just going to do a quick check of the AV while we're waiting, if that's okay
Yeah,
with you.
please. Hi, Shalini.
Hi, how are you doing, Nick?
I'm doing great. It's good to see you
I'm
again.
loving your background.
Thanks. Our background's very popular today.
Is that looking okay?
It is. It might
All
take a little longer for some of the remote locations for it to show up. Sometimes there's a greater lag time at our parks with the slow internet, but
okay.
I see it.
That is very good to know. Okay.
And I just wanted to ask quickly, Shalini and Xusana, would you want me to direct questions from the chat directly to you, or are you going to be monitoring the chat as well, or should I wait until the end? What would you both prefer?
I'll probably be glancing at it throughout, and we'll probably incorporate questions from it. And then any ones that I miss, please do flag them for me. And then at the end, we'll have a big flurry question.
Okay, perfect. Excellent. Agnes, I think we're just about there. I'll wait till 12:32. We got like 60 people or so, and there should be like 70 something.
And are you all using the raised hand function also, or are you just putting questions in chat?
Just question in chat. Everyone else is muted, so they can't talk because it'd just be too many. So it's it's all through chat.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Susanna, I'll try to keep track of those as well.
Thank you.
Oh, I noticed. Here we go. One quick picture before I go.
Yeah, we opted to do teams like this because it's kind of nice for everybody to be able to see each other's faces than the live events. And we wanted to be able to have our managers see each other, which is really pretty awesome. I've taken a couple of photos from each presentation so far, and it's like Hollywood Squares times a million, which is really kind of fun.
All right, I think we're showing us 56. You think we're good to start, Agnes?
Yeah, I'd say go for it.
All right, so we're going to start now. Hello and welcome to Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, presented by Xusana Davis and Shalini Suryanarayana. I'm going to read you a quick intro for each of them. Xusana serves as the state of Vermont's Executive Director of Racial Equity. She was appointed by Governor Scott in 2019. She works with state agencies to identify and address systemic racial disparities and support the state's efforts to expand and diversify the Vermont population. Prior to joining the state of Vermont, she served as Director of Health and Housing Strategic Initiatives at the New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, and as the director of the Black, Latino, and Asian Caucus of the New York City Council. She holds a Juris Doctorate with a concentration in International Human Rights Law from New York Law School. And we're also joined by Shalini, who has spent the last 3 years with the Department of Environmental Conservation. She also serves on the A&R Diversity and Equity Committee in the Department of Environmental Conservation Environmental Justice Committee. This has afforded her the opportunity to learn even more about the social justice issues in our state and has further solidified her interest in remediating systemic racial disparities. She's dedicated most of her career to promoting diversity and advocating for underrepresented populations, as well as creating a culture of inclusiveness. Most recently, she's been appointed to 2 governor's commissions in Vermont, the Governor's Workforce Equity and Diversity Council and the Governor's Committee on the Employment of Peoples with Disabilities. My name is Nick Caputo, and I will be the moderator for the session. We'll be recording this session for future use. Your microphone should already be muted, but please confirm it and mute it if it is not. To ensure engagement during the session, we ask that you keep your cameras on through the training. We understand if you have a really slow internet that may not be possible, but if you can, please keep your cameras on. We'll be using chat as a Q&A, so please put your questions into the chat and either one of us will answer them or I will direct them to the presenter as appropriate. We'll have time for additional questions at the end of the session. Thank you, and here's Xusana Davis.
Right, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Xusana Davis, Racial Equity Director. Really excited to be here to talk about what everyone loves to talk about, right? Injustice, unfairness in general. But we're gonna make it because it's a difficult conversation sometimes, but it's so necessary and it's so worth it. And so let's talk a little bit about today's agenda. I'm gonna talk at you for a while and share some slides. Please be active in the chat if you have questions, if maybe I'm not explaining something clearly, or you want me to go back, or you just have a question and you don't want to forget it and just leave it there for later. And then we will turn it back to you all for a bigger Q&A. I'm going to try to keep it brief so that we can have more time for Q&A, because I find that these discussions are much better when I don't assume what you want to know and just let you tell me what you want to know. And of course, as always, Shalini, I invite you and encourage you to jump in as well, because I always learn something from you when we're in calls and conversations about equity. So please do jump in as needed. All right. So let's begin. I got some slides for you so you don't have to look at me. And every time I look at today's date, I always get the urge to say, may the 4th be with you. I don't know if any of you are Star Wars fans, but when I was a kid, my dad and brother and I were pretty deep into it. So it has a special place in my heart. So may the 4th be with you. Anyway. So our first slide is something that I find really important to say whenever we're having conversations about nature and the outdoors, which is the territory we call Vermont remains unceded Abenaki territory. This is really important because we're having conversations about how we use land, how we use space, what do we do with our parks, or what do we do with state-owned land? And we have to keep in mind that this was something we never really truly owned to begin with, right? We took it, let me not say we, because I certainly didn't participate in that. But, it was taken, and it was, and you know what, I'm gonna silence, just in case that phone you're talking about is me, I'm gonna silence that. The land was taken, and then a system and a society and a government was put on top of it, and now it's too big it feels like it's too big to undo, and so we all just shrug our shoulders and I'm like, well, I guess it's ours now, it's state-owned land. And I just think it's really important that we acknowledge it was never sold, bought, given, or shared. Now that we've got that under our belts, I want to talk a little bit about what is equity and what's the state's approach to it. So on our next slide, you'll see an image that you probably have seen before. It's used a lot in these conversations, and what you see is an image showing two different situations. On the left, equality, where you see people of 3 different heights, each has a box to stand on so that they can see over a fence at a baseball game. And on the right, you see equity, which is the boxes are a little bit redistributed. And so what this image is trying to show is that equality is treating everybody the same, regardless of their actual need. So what you see is that the very tall person has more height than he needs to see over the fence. The middle height person is just able to see over the fence with that one box. And the shortest person is still not able to see over the fence, even with a box. Contrast that with equity on the right, which is providing services, access, or what have you, based on a person's need or situation, not just saying we're going to treat everybody exactly the same. Now, this is a helpful graphic to understanding the difference between the two, but I don't want you to get too hung up on this as a rule, because this also has some limitations, right? For example, this image shows people, and there's something inherent about them that makes them need a box or not need a box, right? It's their height. But when we talk about inequity, especially racial injustice, there's nothing innate about me as a brown person that says I'm supposed to need more help or more services, or that I'm somehow inferior or less able to survive in American society, right? There's nothing inherent about me that says that I need additional services or help. Rather, it's that we've created a society that's designed to disadvantage some people. And so when we start talking about equity work and providing assistance or what have you, sometimes people see it as like handouts. Oh, it's a handout to the brown people, it's a handout to them. When in reality, we're really just normalizing something that was already imbalanced. The other limitation of this graphic is, and I just want to go back one more time for the baseball game one. The other big limitation of this one is we're also worried about the shuffling of the boxes. Oh, he has 2 boxes and that's not fair and I don't have one. And, we see life as zero sum sometimes. And it's really important to remember the boxes are only there as a workaround because the fence is serving as an obstruction. Why do we have a fence in the first place? Because it pits people against each other. We're fighting over boxes without realizing it's because they put a fence in front of us. But do we need that? Is it to protect people from fly balls? You can put netting or chain link so that people can see through it. Is it because people can't afford to go to the game because of income inequality or exclusion? So sometimes we take something as a default or as a given, like an obstacle, like a fence. And we get so caught up in the workarounds and people arguing with each other over scraps, we forget that the obstacle itself needs to be re-examined. Now, I like the next one as well, and I think it's a little more appropriate for the outdoors conversation we're having. And it kind of illustrates the same thing. On the top, you see equality. Each person was given a bicycle of the same size, and you can see that's really not working out well for the person who uses a wheelchair, for the very tall person, or for the very short person. On the bottom, you see equity, which means everybody can participate in this bike parade with a bicycle that suits their needs. So that's the difference when we talk about equality versus equity. Now, how does that relate to state of Vermont? On our next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about how we approach equity work. So we like to think of it in 3 buckets. One is how we are as an employer, right? So basically, how are we taking care of you? Or how is the state government taking care of us as employees, right? Are we doing enough to make sure that the staff is inclusive and that we're being protected in the workplace and that we're thriving, right? Like we have enough promotional path and opportunity, that our workplaces are safe and healthy and free from bias and discrimination, et cetera. The next bucket is how we are as a provider of services. So not just how we treat each other in the office or in the park or in the Jeep when we're doing our rounds or what have you, but also how are we when we engage with members of the public? Are we treating people equitably when they come to the DMV and don't speak English? Or are we treating people equitably when they come to a vaccine clinic and need maybe a different level of service? And then the third bucket is our systems. And this one really is about how are our systems working? Do we always have to sort of backtrack and do workarounds to get to equity? Or are our systems naturally designed to give us equitable results? And I'm going to give you a concrete example of what that means, because it kind of sounds a little like I didn't say anything. So for example, if we have a hiring system and I think a lot of times we assume that people are more capable the more letters behind their name they have, or the more degrees they have, or whatever. And so we end up hiring for positions. A lot of times people look at, well, who's the one who went to the school with the most name recognition, or who's the one who got the highest degree level, or who's the one whose mentor is the most famous person. And those things may have nothing to do with the job. But if our system prioritizes people who have that status and that clout and that prestige, then our system is not equitable because it's prizing something that's not relevant to the job. And so us reevaluating that means let's rewrite job descriptions and let's rewrite education requirements so that we don't end up shutting people out who could be really good at this job, except they didn't go to Yale or because they got an associate's instead of a bachelor's or something like that. So those are kind of the 3 buckets that we like to look at equity work in to make sure that we're taking care of each other, the public, and our systems as a whole. Next, I want to talk a little bit about the outdoors and about who's here in Vermont and who comes to Vermont. So what you're looking at right now is a bar chart that shows the median age of people in Vermont. and it's broken down by racial group. So on average, you see the median age in Vermont, that's the purple line at the top, is 42. We have the second highest median age in the country. We're the second oldest state in the country after Maine. But if you break that, and we're also, I should say, we're the second whitest state in the country. We're 94% white, again, only second to Maine. But if you look at those two data points, second oldest and second whitest, those two data points don't tell us the whole story. Because when you break that down by racial group, what you find is that the median age for white Vermonters and Indigenous Vermonters is in the mid 40s and late 40s respectively, but for all other Vermonters of color, it's in the 20s. And so what that's telling us is that people of color in Vermont, we skew younger. You've got more teenagers, you've got more 20-somethings. And what does that mean? That means when you encounter members of the public in your parks, you're more likely to find, if they're from Vermont or if they live in Vermont, you might be more likely to find young families with small children or strollers on the paths who are of color. Or you might be more likely to find people from the refugee and immigrant community who may be multilingual or who may be wearing religious headgear who are of color, right? So looking at this is helpful. And our next slide is going to show something similar, which is the projected increase in population in Vermont. So as you can see, up until 2050, it's predicted that the population overall is going to grow by about 18%. But again, if you break that down by racial group, then you'll find that there's some pretty big jumps in there. Although I have to warn you, for example, it says the orange line, that's the longest one, it says that the Black population in Vermont is predicted to grow by almost 300%. But again, let's keep in mind, the Black population in Vermont is only about 2% of the whole population anyway. So a 300% growth of 30,000 people is something, but it's not necessarily, it's not as huge as the bars can indicate. So we have to keep that in mind as well. So what is the point of these charts? Because what I'm telling you right now is Vermont's population. I'm not telling you the population of tourists and visitors who you may be encountering. Fact is that even though Vermont as a state is still 94% white, and its residents may be, residents of color may be diverse in age and national origin, you're also going to encounter a lot of people from our neighboring states. Places like New York, places like Quebec, places like Massachusetts, and that have more urban centers and that have more people who want to come to the parks. Because we are super, super white, it means that statistically speaking, anyone from outside the state is extremely likely to be not white, because almost everyone in the country is less white than we are. So, so when you think about who your tourist base, and I encourage you to do this, do an experiment with yourself when you have 3 minutes to spare to breathe between meetings. Do an image search for outdoor recreation, or like hiking, or mountain biking, and just look at the images that come up. Who's represented in those images? Do you see people in hijab, niqab? Do you see brown people? Do you see people with hair that looks like mine? Do you see all couples with a brown person? Are they both brown? Because they almost always are. I don't know why they do that. So, looking at how we market and who we expect to be in our parks is super important, and it has a lot to do with our own implicit bias. Speaking of who's in our parks, I want to share a statistic with you. They did a survey of the National Park Service and found that specifically Black American respondents are only 7% of park visitors. And 16% of those Black respondents said that they don't visit national parks because they felt unsafe in the parks. Contrast that with less than 5% of white people who responded that way. Now, this is important because when you have a place like Vermont, and again, I have to acknowledge, this is about national parks, but and I know Vermont doesn't have a whole lot of national parks in it, but I'm going to be honest with you. As a layperson, I don't know the difference between a national park or a town forest or a state park. I just know, am I frozen for anyone else?
No, I'm hearing you fine.
Okay, thank you. As a layperson, I don't know the difference between like a town forest or a state park or a national park. I just know it's a big green space that I can go walk around and eat grapes or whatever people do in nature, right? And so when I think of this statistic and I hear people say, oh, welcome to Vermont, it's the summertime, you're going to go outside. And I think, yeah, but only when I'm accompanied. You will never see me in a park alone in Vermont because I don't know that I'm going to make it back. That's a real consideration for somebody who looks like me in the world, regardless of what my job is or anything like that. And so when we think about who's coming to the parks and why they're not coming to the parks, safety and a feeling of security is such a big consideration, especially for people like our Asian American community who's been under heightened attack lately, or the Black community, which has been under attack in this country for hundreds of years, it seems like, or anyone who dares to speak a language other than English, where people snap at you, you're in America, speak English. And it's like, you speak English. Anyway, I have a lot of critiques about that one. So this is important because, we're talking about who are in our parks, but I think it's really worth asking ourselves who's also not and why not, and what can we do to fix that? So what are some of the reasons that folks don't feel safe or don't find themselves in parks normally? Well, a lot of it is stereotyping. I'm sure a lot of you have heard the common trope that Black people don't know how to swim or don't like swimming or what have you. And the fact is that in this country, pools were historically segregated. A lot of Black Americans were banned from beaches. In fact, there's a really, really great article for those of you who want to do some light reading on a Friday night. Really incredible article that talks about beach land theft and how a lot of African American families decades ago owned beachfront property in the Carolinas, and it was just systematically taken out from under them. And now it's like golf clubs, country clubs, and universities. And that land is valued at tens of millions of dollars, but it was taken from them for pennies. But in any event, they were banned from many beaches and pools were segregated. So oftentimes there was an opportunity to swim and therefore opportunity to teach your children how to swim. Skiing. Skiing is a popular pastime here in Vermont, and yet it requires a financial investment. First of all, you've got to be able to get to a skiable area, right? And if you don't live in Vermont, then that's a several hours drive probably. Second, you've got to be able to get the equipment, get your lift tickets. I mean, at the end of it, you're talking about a substantial investment, which for a lot of people they can't make. And then parks. A lot of parks were created as a way for white people to get away from what they call urban sprawl, right? It's like a haven. And it's interesting, actually, if you look at a lot of place names around the country, you see do a search for how many white havens there are in the country. A haven for whites. That's created like that on purpose. These are named like that on purpose because a lot of times we created suburban places or parkland that was considered a way to get away from the Browns. And so oftentimes parks were specifically designed and located in places where they knew that they wouldn't be sullied by, well, people like me. So these are some of the underlying reasons that today we have this conception of who's the typical park visitor, who should be in the parks, who tends to engage in outdoor recreation, et cetera. I have another one that's not on the slide, but that I do want to share, the history of, and I know this is, I don't want to get too controversial with legislative items, but I was thinking about hunting and fishing licenses because this was a bill that was passed or worked on last session. And a lot of people don't know the history of non-commercial fishing licenses is actually deeply rooted in racism. I think it was Michigan, the first state to have a non-commercial fishing license. And it was specifically because after the Great Migration, when a lot of Black Americans moved north for opportunity, states like Michigan said, we don't want you to be self-sufficient in our state. If you're going to be here and we can't enslave you anymore, then we're at least going to get our money's worth out of you. So if you want to be able to fish and feed your family, you need to pay us for a license to do so. And that was specifically carved out specifically so that people of color could not be self-sufficient. Now today, I think most states probably have non-commercial license fees for fishing, but the origins of that practice were deeply rooted in systemic racism. And so today we see it as race neutral, but it actually started out very targeted. So these are some of the underlying historical considerations. Now, I want to talk a little bit last about practical guidance, right? Because what I'm telling you, and I did these pictures wrong because I forgot to do the disappear and appear again. So one's cut off. But I want to talk a little bit about practical guidance because I'm telling you a lot about policy and how we think about things. And at the end of the day, you're going to be on the ground in places with people, interacting with the public directly, and situations are going to come up and you want to know how to handle them. I mean, I don't need to waste your time telling you about legislative items that passed last session. So let's talk a little bit about what you might encounter, what you might see in your day-to-day work. So the picture underneath that's not 100% visible is one that I took last spring, actually. It was about a year ago. And this is my neighbor's car. My neighbors are two young white people from a neighboring state, a New England state. And they had been here for a while, but this was at the height of COVID. Everybody was panicking and scared about everything. And so they actually had to write in the dust on their back windshield, "We live in VT, waiting on new plates," because they were so afraid of being harassed or having their things vandalized or being attacked by Vermont people. They felt like they needed to put a warning on their car because they were scared to be two young white people from New England in New England. Now, if they've internalized that messaging about real Vermonter, Flatlander, insider, outsider, if they have internalized that messaging, imagine what it's like for a visitor. Imagine what it's like for a visitor of color. Somebody on the highway who says, "I heard of a great park in Vermont. Let's go and check it out." And then they stop for gas along the way. And then someone at the gas station is haranguing them and attacking them, which happened numerous times here in Vermont. The second image that you see is one that I took also last summer. I guess I was kind of on tour last summer. This was at, I don't even remember now. Well, I guess it was at Beach Road and Breezy Avenue. At a public beach. It was a really nice lake. And why can't I remember? I'll remember it. And somebody scrawled, "Caspian, thank you, Agnes." And somebody added white supremacy to the stop sign, right? A number of you may have seen or heard about other incidents, like we found racist graffiti in the park. We found some Patriot Front insignia drawn or spray painted at the Waterbury Reservoir, or like an anti-Indigenous symbol in, painted on a rock somewhere in a park. And, a big question is, what do we do when we see that kind of thing? The car picture speaks about out-of-state bias, right? How do you handle that? The other ones, one of them, like the one on the right, the stop sign, is like, okay, that's actually a good thing, but it's technically graffiti. So how do we handle that? And the other ones is just like, bad ideas, bad graffiti, don't do it. And these are all different scenarios, right? One is like, can you really be the enforcer of making people play nice with each other? Like, can you make the Vermont family be nice to the New Hampshire, to the Massachusetts family? Is that your job? Should it be your place to do that? And without getting, I guess, too deep into it, our role is to make sure that parkland is accessible to all equitably, right? It means that when we're observing behavior that is harmful or that is problematic in some way, that people are not having equitable access, it's our job to remedy that. And sometimes that means, the people at National Life are doing that in the offices through policy. And sometimes that means some of us are on the ground in the parks doing it in person. So I have another slide for you. It's very simple. It just says, "Beware false solutions." And I say that because sometimes what we think is the easiest solution is actually causing more harm. For example, how many times have you heard about student A is bullying student B, so they change student B's class schedule so that they don't have to be crossing paths with student A? Happens all the time. Let's relate it back to parks. You have family A who maybe they're members of a dominant group, or maybe they're local to the state. And family B, maybe they're visitors, or maybe they're a different ethnic or racial group. And there's a problem, and A is discriminating against family B. And so you might say to yourself, well, the easiest solution is for family B. You should just get out of here. And then they won't be harassing you and you'll be fine and it'll be fine. But that's not actual equity, because what we're doing then is removing I don't like using the word, but we're removing a victim from a situation and giving an abuser full title and full access and validation for their behavior, because we think that we're quickly settling it and making it go away because it's uncomfortable. That's what I'm characterizing as a false solution. You think you've separated the two parties and that it's all good, but you've done so in a way that almost validates the harassment in the first place. So I'm starting to feel myself ramble. So I'm going to scale it back and end with this quote, which I always enjoy. Is from Curtis Ogden. He's over at the Interaction Institute. And he says, the work for racial equity is about undoing as much as it is about doing. We do not simply build new culture or behavior on top of old, especially in situations that are characterized by oppression. Some things must be released, and this letting go does not come easy. And the reason that I share this quote is because sometimes we think about racial equity work or any kind of equity work, and we think, well, what are the new good habits we can adopt? And that's important. But it's also about recognizing our not good habits and being able to change those. So what do I mean by that? I mean that if we are walking up on a situation that appears to be an altercation between two families, let's say a family of brown folks and a family of non-brown folks, do we walk into the situation automatically assuming, what did the brown folks do? That's what I mean about undoing. Are we walking in with certain assumptions, biases? Are we automatically assuming that some folks are expected to be troublemakers, or that some patrons maybe don't know or deserve to be in the outdoors, or that inexperienced recreators are somehow not as valuable as park goers as other more experienced recreators, if that's a word. So that's what I've got for you formally, and I really just want to take the rest of our time to hear from you and to be able to address some questions. I also have a few links that I want to share, and I'm going to share them afterwards. And I know you all are really busy, and you're not necessarily chained to a desk and a computer, and I don't want to give you homework necessarily, but I do think that a couple of these things are going to be valuable for you. So one is going to be a link to a video that shows they did some hypothetical testing in a park and looked at people's implicit bias, the way they reacted. The second link is going to be that article I mentioned about the land theft from beaches, if you're interested. And then the third one is going to be a list of things that we can do in and around parks to be more equitable. So please do look out for that. And thank you for your time.
There are a couple of questions that popped up in the chat, Xusana.
All right, let's have them.
The first one is, what can we do at our level to help people of color feel more welcome and safe to visit the park?
Yeah, so many things. So many things. The first thing I would say, I mean, it's in everything, honestly. Like it's in everything we do. For example, for those of you who wear uniforms, especially if the uniform is sort of stylized following a military template. No, okay, I'm seeing some no. Okay, good, because that's really uncomfortable.
T-shirts.
Oh, see, good. T-shirts are non-threatening. That's good. But you know, I mean, it's in everything that you do, right? So for example, again, when let's say you're in a car, maybe you're doing patrols or you're doing the rounds or what have you, how you step out of the car, do you put your hand on your sort of tool belt? Because when I see a person, even if they're in a polo and they're reaching for their waist or tool belt area, I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to become a statistic today, right? So one is like body language when you interact with people. You are accustomed to being an authority where you are. And so it's easy for you sometimes, I think, to speak authoritatively and to forget that people internalize that. And sometimes they want to shrink from it a little bit. And that affects them, and that dynamic is there. Another thing that we can do to make parks feel more inclusive is, you know, when you see people behaving in a way that's not inclusive, check them on that. And I say that in two ways. One, again, in your role as a park manager, but also in your role as a person. And specifically, if you're a white person, it's your job to check other white people. Sorry, but that's your responsibility, right? So when you hear people who are, being disrespectful or using language that is extremely, racist, vile, whatever, you have a sort of ethical and maybe even job duty to intervene and be like, hey, you know what? We have a code of conduct in the park, and we're going to need you to just not do what you're doing, or something like that. And yeah, a lot of people are just going to dismiss you and say, I have a constitutional right to shout the N-word in this park if I really want to. And yeah, you know what? They do. But the point is, if you don't say anything at all, then it's almost like you're tacitly approving of it. And that's important.
Nick, did you have your hand up?
I did. I was just thinking about what Xusana was saying and thinking how it related mostly to, or how one of the big areas where we can really pay attention to that is the way we do enforcement, night rounds, the way we enter sites and approach people that may be a little too loud or violating a park. I remember, like the big mag light flashlights and stuff like that, just projecting a different sort of image, and it's threatening. It's threatening, and just to be aware of that when we're going onto sites at night and doing enforcement and trying to ask people to comply with park rules. So that came to mind as being one area where that could definitely play a role.
And Xusana,
I did see a follow-up from Mark about the sort of, it's my constitutional right to say/do this. And so how do we enforce that if the person technically has a right or what have you? And I'm seeing a couple of responses, which is great. But yeah, it's difficult. And we're having that same conversation on the policing side and the sort of hate crime side. So you're not alone. And the reason this is hard is because there's no clear answers, because the pesky Constitution. And so how do you enforce that? Well, it's tricky. In some ways you can't, but again, just about calling it out for a lot of people can at least chill them or make them think twice from doing it, as opposed to nobody saying anything about it at all. So it may not be something that you can strictly enforce and be like, I'm forbidding you from using this term or from saying this thing to this guy. We can't do that. And we just have to acknowledge that limitation. But to say, hey, you know what? If somebody were doing something similar to you, I would want to speak out on your behalf. Or like, yeah, okay, you rented this this campsite, but this isn't your home, right? This is part of a public area. And so, you don't behave here like you behave in your home, right? Yeah, it's an unsatisfactory answer because it's just a garbage situation. And that is the truth.
There was another follow-up question about how do we remove a group? I don't know if they have park protocols for that.
Yeah, I would probably defer actually to you all and your leadership team on how that's handled. But I think that what I'm going to say here, and I guess this is more for, managerial and supervisory roles, but what I'm going to say here is if a member of your team feels the need to remove a group because of something like inequity or discrimination, I just strongly, strongly, strongly encourage their direct supervisors to back them up on it, because you're putting yourself out there in defense of equity. And so if that's a situation that's happening, I'm just encouraging all of the leaders, managers, and your bosses to back you all up on that. So whatever the protocol is for removal, just make sure that if you have someone who really deems like, we got to get rid of this group because they're just super racist or super sexist, or they're discriminating against this LGBTQIA+ group, or they're harassing these people who are living with disabilities or what have you. If it's for a reason like that, then the state backing them up is really key to showing that it's a priority for us and that we're serious about it.
How can we recruit a more diverse staff?
All right, I'm gonna tell you what you got to do. a lot of the challenge for park staff and for just, you know, in general with anything related to outdoor space is that a lot of the work is seasonal. And oftentimes you find a disparate number of seasonal workers who are of color or who are low income or who are from another historically marginalized group. So if you want to recruit a more diverse staff, then the first thing we've got to do is provide real promotional path and opportunity so that people can stick around long term. That might mean having roles that like start seasonal but maybe shift into long term. And I know that I know we're a small government and we can't just. The last government I worked for was New York City, and I think every job I had there was probably unnecessary. But you know, they just have bloat. Like they just have a lot of unnecessary jobs. Not that it wasn't good work, but like they didn't need me. But in Vermont, I think we kind of need all of us, and we don't have unnecessary jobs. Everybody who's there is there because we need that role. So I know it's easy for me to say, just like create more positions. Okay, with what money? But that is the answer: create more positions. The other thing to do to recruit a more diverse staff, again, remember we talked about stereotyping in the outdoors. That's not just for patrons. It's also for who we see as part of our employee workforce. A lot of people don't see themselves as arborists or rangers or park managers because a lot of us have been trained to believe, well, that's not for me, or they would laugh at me, or I'm inexperienced, you know, I don't have a background in that. I don't feel safe in the park, so I'm not going to be there after dark, you know, regardless of whether I've got a badge or whatever, right? So that means doing that at the employee level too. Where are we recruiting? Do we have a pipeline program for youth? Maybe we go to more urban centers that are around us and say, hey, come up for a 2-week-long program and just learn about being an arborist or learn about working in the parks, and just have kind of like a pipeline program similar to what they do in tech, where they have coding camp for kids, you know. I used to work for a test prep company years ago, and I had one student, and they told me, they were like, look, you're just filling in for a couple of lessons because his instructor is out and he's really not into this. He's not into school. He doesn't want to take this test. And they basically told me, they're like, just go through the motions because he's not. And I got to his house and he was just so not into it. And he's like, I want to be an arborist. This means nothing to me. I don't care about the SATs. And I wanted to just be like, you know what, bro? Do that. Go be an arborist. The hell with all. And you know, can't really say that, but and I'm sorry, it was a terrible tangent. But the point is, there are young people who just need a nudge, and we can give that nudge. And then the last thing, again, is even if we do bring more diverse staff on board, and even if we're not subjecting them to harassment or bias, are we letting park patrons do that? Are we stepping in and defending our colleagues? Are we separating people by removing our colleague who is not the problem? You know, are we providing them a space where they can just breathe and maybe talk to somebody and make sure that they're not being harassed and then thrown back out there to the wolves without like being able to just debrief that or say, hey, you know what, I want to be reassigned for a day or two or something like that. So those are kind of all things. I'm gonna stop talking now.
Another question. I have had guests display Confederate flags in their campsites. They were not receptive to my suggestion that they should take it down. Is there other recourse in this situation?
No, because this is America and you are allowed to fly that. And it sucks. And it doesn't even make sense. In Vermont, this state fought for the Union, but okay. And I've never seen people more proud of the losing side of a war before. It's just amazing to me. But regardless, no, unfortunately, there is no legal recourse. You cannot mandate it. Yeah, and it is a tremendously unsatisfactory answer. And believe me, we have looked very deeply into this, and we just can't. So I think when that happens, you know, again, I would continue to make the suggestion. I mean, it feels defeatist to be like, we can't legally do anything about it, but I would make the suggestion anyway, right? And, you know, some people might be a little bit rational and be like, look, you know, do you want people to have do you want people to be next to you in the campsite and have this other flag or whatever? And I wouldn't, please, if you do that, don't use the BLM flag as a contrast, because they do not represent the same things at all. But, you know, again, I mean, one strategy is appeal to their reason and be like, look, you know, I'm not singling you out because the Confederacy was horrible and only lasted 5 years and isn't worth remembering. But, you know, there are other people, other flags, other imagery and posters that you wouldn't want to see on your campsite. So we're trying to keep things kind of balanced for everybody.
On a related note, Jessica brought up a real life scenario, and she mentioned that it happened to her and her family at a state park. And she said that a neighbor next to them had a huge Confederate flag hanging on the back of their lean-to. So her family as the guest, she's saying, what would happen if we complained about it? So her interracial family was camping next to that display, and she didn't complain because she didn't want to put staff in a tough position. But what could staff do if they saw it, or if a park guest complained about it?
You know, I think there's a lot of power in complaints, especially if there are multiple complaints. One, it takes a little bit of the heat off you, but also it kind of shows, listen, it's not just one or two uptight people. It's you have come here and pissed off a bunch of folks. What are you doing? Evaluate your life. So I think that at the end of the day, you want park goers to be able to feel comfortable coming to you with a concern or a complaint, right? Not just sort of like quickly leaving the park and never coming back to the state again. You want people to feel comfortable coming to you. So maybe that means you have something posted that's like, hey, you know, we want you to feel safe. We want you to feel safe. We want you to feel welcome. If there's something happening that is not contributing to that, tell us. And that's not necessarily a guarantee that we can force it to be over, but we want to know about it is the point. And I think just making ourselves more approachable as a team is a huge part of that.
Yeah, I just also wanted to let you know, somebody put in a comment from Elmore Park about a reference. They said using the quote, authority of the resource, close quote, is helpful. Maybe Rebecca has a link to this. So I don't know if that's something that can be shared. And there was another comment, Dakari here. I appreciate when white people call out racist or harmful behavior, even when there are no people of color around. Don't put yourself in danger, of course, but it's even riskier for people of color to constantly speak up. Feeling very welcome by park staff, by the way.
Yeah. And I see you at Maidstone. It's tough to reason with people when they're drinking. Yeah. And you also don't want to put yourself in an unsafe situation, right? I mean, you know, it is easy for me here in my office. I'm not in an office, but it looks like I'm in a hostage video because of my white wall. But you know, it's easy for me to be like, you should speak up when you see injustice because you're a ranger with a polo shirt. And it's like, okay, but I'm not the one who's out there, right? So I completely recognize that you're putting yourself out there and you're taking on a degree of risk too. At the end of the day, you know, we want park goers to feel safe. We want you to feel safe. And we want jerks to feel unsafe. And that is just how I really feel. You know, I'm going to suggest something, and I know that management is going to say, please strike that from the record, but I'm going to say it anyway, because you can't stop me. But sometimes I think being flexible with the rules and bending rules for that moral arc of justice sometimes is just the right thing to do. For example, you may have, well, that's not a good example. This is a flagrant violation. But what if you have a particular recreation area that says no dogs, right? Like no dogs in the campsite. That's one of the policies that we see nationally that tends to deter single female park goers because they won't necessarily feel comfortable going deep into the woods or being somewhere if they're by themselves and they don't have a dog or something like that. So, you know, I don't know. If you see me in the park and I'm accompanied by a dog, Are you going to give me a citation? I hope not. I see you, Stillwater. I'm sorry. That's perhaps not a great example because a dog is very obvious, and you can't really hide that. But it's sometimes rules are hard and rules don't promote equity. And I trust your judgment at deciding when sometimes a rule is not promoting equity. And bonus points if you come back and tell me so we can fix it.
Thank you so much, Xusana and Shalini. Are there any other questions before we wrap this up? We're just about 1:20. I want to remind everyone to please go to the link in the chat for the attendance form. That was a great presentation, and I thank you so much for joining us today. Oh, I thought somebody was talking, but I forgot they're all muted. So thank you very much, both of you. Is there anything else? I'm checking over here. It seems like it was very well received. Thank you.
One other thing I just want to mention and say out loud too is that it's really important for us to recognize that this conversation, for all of you managers, this is just the beginning of the conversation for us. And we have work to do. And I know that Xusana and Shalini, like they packed in a lot of information in a little bit. And so this is just the beginning for us. And we do have, there's a really interesting, the committee that Shalini is on, the Diversity and Equity Committee. There's some really cool resources. If folks are interested, I can send you some resources that they send out. But this is just the beginning. And I'm really excited that the two of you were able to join us today. This is really huge. So thank you. And park staff, keep your eyes and ears open. We've got years ahead of us to grow forward. So thank you so much.
Thank you all. Looking forward to next time.
Excellent. Have a great day, everyone. In our next class, or it's not really a class, just 10 minutes, and it starts immediately. So when you log out, just go to the schedule and click on the next link for the day. Thank you.